Hello and welcome back. It's been a minute, right? But I was working on a cool technical video. This is more of an update to something I did a few years ago, which is how to run openwrt on a Proxmox host. What is openwrt? Openwrt is an open source router firmware, right? So basically you take your average consumer router, and if it's supported, you flash openwrt to it. And from there, you unlock some cool features, right? You can have one Wi-Fi router that has multiple SSIDs. You can add some enterprise features like radius, lots of cool stuff. I like it because it's very lightweight. And a few years ago, I released a video on how to run openwrt on Proxmox in a virtual machine. It's time for an update. It's been a while. There's been some upgrades to openwrt. It still runs very well. It still requires very little resources. And I thought it would be a good idea to redo that video, but this time show you how to run openwrt using an LXC. So you get even less resource usage and overhead for this router firmware. The main advantage here is that you're able to use openwrt and it is only going to use the bare minimum of resources. Like when I was running this, it was using 7 megabytes of RAM. And when I started sending some network traffic through, it barely hit 100. So you could have a dedicated router for your lab environment and know that that router will use very minimal resources. It's some cool shit. So let's go ahead and get started with openwrt. The first step we're going to do is to download the openwrt rootfs. There is no pre-made container image for openwrt. Like if you were to go to your local storage, go to container templates and click on templates, openwrt's not listed there. What that means is that you're going to have to download the openwrt rootfs yourself as a tar zip image, then use that to create your openwrt container. In order to do that, you're going to have to go to the Jenkins Linux Containers website. I'm going to paste the link to this site at the bottom of this YouTube video. Once you get to the Jenkins Linux Containers website, you'll download the rootfs. So let's wait for it to load. So it went ahead and loaded off screen. Once you get to the Jenkins site, you'll want to select the latest stable build, unless you like living life on the edge. Then you'll want to select your openwrt image. This should be the one right here. Select AMD64, click the check mark, and it's going to take you to this page. And then the link you want to copy is this rootfs tar.xz, and just click copy link. After that, you'll want to go back to your Proxmox hosts, click on the node itself and go to shell. And then you're going to want to use wget to download the openwrt container image. The command you want to use is wget, 2 commas, paste the link, -O, and then you want to place it in var lib vztmpl cache. And then you want to call this openwrt.tar.xz. And that will download the openwrt image directly into your Proxmox host. Now, when you go back to that local storage, you'll notice we now have an additional image there. Step 2 is to launch the openwrt container. The next step would be actually creating your container image. If you try to use this to build a standard image, it'll fail. So let me show you what happens. Let's call this openwrt. I'll give this whatever password you want to give it, right? Then when you go to template and you select your openwrt image, give it 1 gig RAM, 1 CPU. And then we're going to give it a dhcp interface. Let's call it test. And then 1.1.1. Now, when you actually try to deploy, and there you go, you see it failed right there, unable to detect OS distribution, which is fine because we are going to manually deploy this using the Proxmox command line. So to do this, we'll do pct create. I'll call this VM100, then point it to the storage. And then you'll want to use the / to break the command up. Make sure you put a space at the end of each one of these. And then we're going to give this an architecture of AMD. Then after that, you want to do a host name, openwrt, give it net0, and then give the name of that net0 interface, eve0, and then assign it a bridge, which is vmbridge0. Then assign it an IP address type of dhcp. Then assign it a rootfs local-lvm 4. Then you want to give it some features like nesting. You want to make this container unprivileged. Don't forget the --. And then the most important part is the OS type, which is unmanaged. And for those of you who don't want to type out this entire command, I will include it at the bottom of this YouTube video. When you're done, this is what your command will look like. PC to create 100 local vztemplate, openwrt.tar.xz, architecture AMD 64, hostname openwrt, assign it the network interface and bridge, assign it the rootfs, make sure nesting is enabled, make sure the container is unprivileged, and then of course the OS type is unmanaged. Then if you hit enter, it'll create it, and it should only take a few minutes or a few seconds, depending on how fast your host is. After that, you do pct start 100 to start the container, and then we're just going to hop into the container real quick and do some quick changes. You can tell everything's working because when you hop onto the container, it'll tell you please enter the activate console, and you'll get the openwrt console right there. And the cool thing is, just looking at the baseline of this, when you give it a second, you'll notice it's using like 5 megabytes of RAM. So let's go back to the console again. And then what you want to do is actually update openwrt. So you can do a quick apk update, and it's going to download the updates. Then you can do apk add nano, because we're going to need nano to configure the firewall in a few minutes. What you also want to do is install the openwrt web interface. So you do apk install luci-ssl. My bad. It's apk add luci-ssl. And give that a few minutes. Again, all of these commands will be pasted in the YouTube subscription for this video. And with that, we are ready. Next thing you're going to want to do is restart the luci web interface. So do etc init.d uhttpd restart. We're almost done. We then have to go into the firewall and configure it to allow access from WAN, because right now the only interface attached to that openwrt container is the single interface we created. So do nano etc config firewall, and then we want to scroll almost down to the end of this, and we're going to add a new config rule. So we do config rule option target accept option source WAN option proto TCP option dest port 443 option name Allow-WAN-Web. Then you just want to save this. And then after you're done, you'll want to restart the openwrt container. So you can just do a quick reboot. Give it a moment or two. You can see it's rebooting the container for us. Then what you want to do is a quick IP address to get the IP address of the openwrt interface. Let's see here. It says the state is up. Let's check our network here. It is not up. Set to dhcp. Let's see. Let's give it a second and see. Okay, so it just took it a second for it to get the IP from the dhcp server. So now we should be able to access the openwrt web interface at 192.168.1.161. So just open up a new Chrome or browser tab, go to HTTPS, enter the IP address, and you'll know you succeeded when it just logs you in to the default web interface. And on a default install of openwrt, there's no password on the web interface, so you should just be able to hit login. And there you go. You now have openwrt working. So you have openwrt working, but it's still not quite there yet, right? If you're doing this, I'm going to assume that you're using this as a router. So what you're going to have to do is add another interface. And now you can just go back in and use the Proxmox web interface. We'll call this eth1. Set this to also be dhcp. Click add. And then when we go back to the openwrt web interface and refresh our page, you should see the additional interface there. Then you can go to network interfaces. All right, give it a few seconds for it to update itself. And there you go. You now have two WAN interfaces, right? ETH0 and ETH0. And then you're going to have to add this. We'll call this ETH1 DHCP client. And then we're going to select ETH1 from our dropdown and create the interface. Hit save. And then save and apply. And as you can see, it works just like your regular version of openwrt if you've ever used that before. I have some old routers I've deployed it on before I had my new networking equipment. So yeah, pretty simple video, boys. Pretty straightforward. That's how you get openwrt installed. One of the reasons I like this is, again, the resource usage, right? If you're not using the Wi-Fi features of openwrt, the routing features are very powerful and useful because you get a full-fledged firewall and router with a web interface. and it only costs you 7 megabytes of RAM for it to just sit idle. When you start sending traffic through, it's probably going to hover around 100, 150, but that's still a lot less than something like OpenSense or pfSense. So congrats. Thank you everyone for watching. If you'd like to see more of this content, please go ahead and hit subscribe. Let me know what you think about this video down below or any improvements you'd like me to make to it in the comment section. Thank you for watching.